Good evening. My name is Jonathan Cohen, and I serve as one of the rabbis here at Oraynu Congregation for Humanistic Judaism. On behalf of our congregation, it is my pleasure to welcome you to our annual David Glazer Memorial Program. David Glazer was one of those extraordinarily active members that any congregation would be lucky to have. She was a dear friend to many Oraynuniks from the time she and her family moved to Toronto in the 1980s until her untimely death in 2003. We fondly remember Davida's great love of learning, her love of Jewish culture, and her abiding commitments to the ideals of secular humanistic Judaism and progressive Zionism. Our memorial fund in her name was established through the generosity of Mark Gutman, Davida's husband, and of Gabe and Giddy Glazer, Davida's parents, and of their circle of friends and family. Even before Davida came to Oraynu, Gabe and Giddy, who lived in Israel, were VIPs here, for they were founding members of the International Institute for Secular Humanistic Judaism. Once Davida moved to Toronto, Gabe and Giddy were frequent visitors at Oraynu. After their deaths, they gave a very generous bequest to Oraynu that allows us to continue to honor Davida's memory by gathering in her name. We believe that they and Davida would have been delighted with the conversations that will take place today. I would now like to read a message written for tonight's event by Davida's children, Shira and Sean Gutman. From a young age, Oraynu and the ideologies that define it have played a large role not only in our lives, but with our relationship to Judaism. We both attended Oraynu Sunday School first as something we were just told we had to do by our parents, but then evolving into an understanding that this was a community for us, not only to learn about culture and traditions of our religion, but also a place where we could make friends and have support. This is something that would stay with us for our entire lives. As we grew up and expanded our Jewish community, the lessons, beliefs, and ideology remained with us as we cherished and became immensely proud of our place within the secular humanistic community, something that our mom and grandparents, Giddy and Gabe, also embodied throughout their lives. We understood that Judaism can be celebrated in so many different ways, and while there were others around us who practiced their Judaism in a way that looked different from ours, we were able to celebrate the differences and similarities and find common ground that has allowed us to continue to build our own Jewish communities and to share and educate those around us about what this type of Judaism looks like and why it is important. When we were both attending Camp Gesher as staff in the early 2000s, we both remember a time when there was a suggestion that Birkat Hamazon be mandatory for all staff following our Shabbat meal. We both objected to this, suggesting that not all Jews practiced in the same way, and that while we grew up celebrating Judaism in our house and identified as Jewish as much as anyone else, that was not part of our practice, and suggesting that it be mandatory went against the idea that different Jews honor their religion differently. We are proud to be a small part of this amazing community, and we know that our mom, Davida, and our grandparents would have been so proud to see Oraynu continuing to teach and practice the beliefs that they were also passionate about. We are honored that this series has continued throughout the years and are sorry that we cannot be there with you all tonight. We look forward to continuing the same tradition for years to come. I now ask Jennie Morris, an Oraynu member and one of our panelists for the evening, to lead us in our land acknowledgement.
Thank you for joining our Oraynu community today. Before we begin our program, let us be grateful for the privilege of living on the lands which are the ancestral homes of the First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples in Canada. We acknowledge our obligation to sustain their stewardship and this precious land. We offer our support to our Indigenous kin suffering disposition and oppression, and we will work to ensure that they regain their rightful share in the harvest of this rich land.
Thank you, Jennie. As we begin our program tonight, we also acknowledge the tragedy that continues to fold in Ukraine caused by the unprovoked aggression of Putin's Russia. Tonight is not a night for us to consider that topic in depth, but I know that for many of us, our thoughts are with the people of Ukraine. As with COVID, we are mindful of how quickly life can change. May the people of Ukraine and all who suffer from the ravages of war find safety. And may the day come soon when all in our world experience freedom, justice, and lasting peace. Our topic today, Humanistic Judaism after COVID, is an important one, for clearly COVID has changed and continues to change our world. When titling our program Humanistic Judaism After COVID, we of course did not mean to suggest that COVID and its effects on our lives are over and done. Far from it. Rather, we wish to examine how COVID has changed our movement and to think together to imagine what the future might hold. 2 years ago, how many of us knew about the word Zoom? Yet over the past 2 years, Zoom has kept many of our communities afloat, allowing us not only to survive, but even at times to expand. Our event tonight is evidence of that. Our panelists this evening come from multiple countries, and I suspect at our event we certainly have attendees from different countries and possibly even different continents. Simply holding a program like this one is not something we would have done before COVID. But how has our COVID changed our movement beyond simply using Zoom? What have been the greatest challenges? What have been the greatest opportunities? And as a movement that has long embraced science over superstition, how can Humanistic Judaism help us navigate the COVID-related changes taking place in our world? These are not simple questions, and I am delighted that our 4 distinguished panelists, each a leader at the forefront of Humanistic Judaism, can help us explore them together. Let me introduce them and then say a few words about the format of this webinar. Adam Shalom is the rabbi of Kol Kadash Humanistic Congregation in suburban Chicago and the dean of for North America of the International Institute for Secular Humanistic Judaism. Rabbi Shalom holds degrees from Yale and the University of Michigan, including a PhD in Near Eastern Studies. He is the author of the adult education curriculum, Introduction to Secular Humanistic Judaism, and the editor of Jews and the Muslim World Solving the Puzzle. Jennie Morris, who read our land acknowledgement, is an active member and student leader within Oraynu Congregation for Humanistic Judaism. Thanks for waving. She also serves as one of the 2 teen representatives on the board of directors of the Society for Humanistic Judaism. Paul Golan is the executive director for the Society of Humanistic Judaism. He is also a writer, a speaker, an advocate, and a consultant on issues of importance to the Jewish community, including secularity, intermarriage, disaffiliation, and inclusion. Paul has co-authored 2 books about Jewish intermarriage, and his writing has appeared in The Forward, Jewish Week, Huffington Post, and elsewhere. He is the white Ashkenazi half of Jupanese. That's half Jewish, half Japanese, a multiracial household, and administers the website jupanese.com. Rabbi Denise Hanlarski is the leader of the online community Secular Synagogue, which she founded. She is also a professor and a mom. Previously, Rabbi Hanlarski was a rabbi at Oraynu Congregation for Humanistic Judaism, and she is also the author of the book The A to Z of Intermarriage. The process for the evening is as follows. I have asked each of the panelists to speak for about 8 minutes, sharing their insights on today's topic, after which we will have some discussion among the panelists. Following that, we will open things up for your questions and comments. Right now, the chat is closed. But later we will open the chat so you can share your questions and comments with the panel. Your chat comments won't go to everyone, but we may then share them with everyone. So without further ado, let us begin our conversation. Rabbi Adam, shalom.
Thank you, Jonathan. Thank you, Oraynu. Thank you, everyone who's here for this program. And thank you to unknown people in the future who will watch video of this program. We may never know who you are, but that is the new reality in which we live. Humanistic Jews are students of human nature. We try to meet human needs for community and inspiration and Jewish roots with a positive secular approach, but those are human needs. One of the best and worst features of human nature is our ability to get used to things, even to get used to terrible things. I asked myself the question, are we really after COVID? And I looked at the numbers. In the United States, we've had about 940,000 deaths due to COVID. 360,000 of those deaths were in 2020, averaging about 30,000 a month. 460,000 died in 2021. That averages about 39,000 a month. And in just the first 2 months of 2022, we've had 120,000 die. That's 60,000 a month. Is COVID worse, or are we just getting used to it? Or is it those people who are dying, so we're ready to move on if we're on the other side of that divide? All that being said, people are ready to look forward and to see what's changed in the last 2 years. And to explore that, I have 3 C's. The first C is computers. Here we are, the push to online programming. Now, at the Institute, we had actually already been doing online classes for several years. It's one of the ways Rabbi Hanlarski was able to become a rabbi, because we did online classes at that time through WebEx. And then based on her recommendation, actually, we moved to Zoom even before 2020. Of course, I lost my advantage of knowing the tricks of Zoom within 3 months. Everybody caught up. But for a short period of time, I knew things people didn't. But as of now, over the last 2 years, we've presented several public online classes. We've posted YouTube videos of past weekend seminars and ongoing adult learning. Denise and I even did a Drunk History Purim edition 1 year ago, just about, which we never would have done if not for COVID. We've also seen at the Institute an increase in our YouTube viewership. We have our own channel, but now we have over 4,500 subscribers. And we put out a number of lectures by Rabbi Sherwin Wine that had been recorded when he was around. Now there's over 2,300 of those up on a SoundCloud page. We would never have done this if not for the change to the computer experience. However, I will say that while we have a toe in the digital waters, our roots are definitely analog. I've led online services for the last 2 years now, and now a number of people in my community, including me, are pushing to be back in person. Maybe we also webcast it. Maybe once in a while we do a hybrid interactive service where not only can remote people see and hear what happens in the room, but people in the room can see and hear what's happening online and have it go in 2 directions. It's a little more complicated technically. It can be done, but we have to think about what we want to do, because I think there is a truth to say that there's only so far you can do humanistic Judaism without the physical presence of other humans. As far as the digital world of social media more broadly, the Institute and my congregation, Kol Hadash, are somewhat functional on Facebook. Kol Hadash posts an occasional audio podcast, and I've started blogging a little bit more regularly. We are barely literate on Twitter, and we are basically clueless on Snapchat and Instagram and TikTok and whatever's coming next. So we have a lot of room for growth in that online world. There are 2 big computer-related challenges I see going forward. The first is that those communities that have done online programming now have participants and even members who joined because of this distance programming. And we have to figure out how to balance that while serving people in person. I intentionally did not make an online congregation. I want to see people in person, and I don't want to do it only online. I mean, if nothing else, hopefully we've learned to always put the time zones for our online programs, because it doesn't matter where you are, you can participate if you know what time it starts. The second challenge will be changing expectations. We're going back to having our Passover Seder in person this year at my congregation, and we had a member who's going to be out of town ask me, can they participate online? No one ever asked before to participate at an in-person Seder online, but now the expectations have changed. A few months ago, I was working with a funeral director setting up the broadcasting equipment to broadcast a graveside service for a memorial, for a funeral. And I said to this funeral director, you know, even after COVID, people are going to ask us to do this. We can't go back anymore. The expectations have changed, and now people will think, even if I'm not in town, maybe there should be a way for me to participate remotely in this service, even if it's only graveside, not only in the funeral home. And some funeral homes had even started to broadcast their services, but now they all do, and they will all have to, because that's the new expectation. So computers is number one. Number two is community. Is it in demand, or does it seem old-fashioned? I mean, it's definitely a need for some, and I'm not sure if it's a need for everyone. And it's a little too early to see what those long-lasting effects will be. Will online community connections survive the reopening of movie theaters and travel? Will communities that offer things for free start pushing for membership or financial support? And will that poison the golden goose? Will those who got used to not going to anything come back if we pull the plug on some online programs? In fact, I found that it may be the only way to get them to come back, because in December we ran hybrid services. I had 2 people in person and 10 screens online, because it was more convenient, not because it was they were afraid. They were very close. It wasn't distance, it was ease. And so we have to find that right balance. We saw great data from the Pew study that came out in 2020 on the secularization of American Jews and a greater openness to welcoming intermarried families. But we have to ask, is that good or bad for humanistic Judaism? We were actually mentioned by name as one of those denominations, as a small option. But congregational affiliation is a minority experience in the American Jewish world. So if we're selling community, do enough people still want community? Or do they just want online programming drop-in like this? And the third C, after computers and community, is coping. Now, I have not heard of major conflicts in our communities over pandemic mask-wearing rules or vaccination requirements or safety measures, although at some point, some of the deep cleaning may be COVID security theater, given what we know about surface transmission, but it makes people feel better. Sometimes we humor them. But our humanist reliance on science was very important to help us get through the pandemic, certainly the period before and the access to vaccine period. But now we need other humanist values. We need a reminder that living is more than just not dying. We need to think about Sherwin Wine's idea of the life of courage. We live without cosmic guarantees. We walk that tightrope of life without a net. And we have to learn to live with uncertainty. One of his best lines, I feel, is that we have the courage to make decisions even when the consequences of those decisions cannot be easily predicted. I am not at all being cavalier with people's lives. I'm fully aware of the issues of the immunocompromised who are still at great risk. I'm still wearing my mask wherever I go. And I understand there are children under 5 who are not yet able to be vaccinated, and their families. Sometimes the science will support what makes you comfortable. And sometimes the science may allow what makes you uncomfortable. We may not be post-COVID, but I think we are post-COVID shock. And we need to pivot to post-COVID living. We need to make the turn and start to get used to new realities. In the 1920s, at some point, the great infection changed. It used to be influenza, and eventually it became the flu. And before 2020, we lived with the consequences of the flu, even if it did kill tens of thousands every year. We didn't notice. It was something we got used to. Now we are in the 2020s, and we need to envision a time for another shift from coronavirus to the Rona, maybe. One of the risks that we take living in a world where nothing is 100% safe. Whatever precautions we do choose to take in 2022, we should remember the rabbinic justification for breaking Jewish law to save your life. They say that you should actively live by these rules and not die by them. So let's get busy living together and living for each other. Thank you.
Adam, thank you very much. Our next speaker is Jennie Morris.
Thank you, Rabbi Jonathan and Rabbi Adam. Hi, everyone. My name is Jennie. I use they, them pronouns. I'm 18 years old, and I'm in grade 12 at Havergal College, soon to be in the Bachelor of Arts Foundation Year program at the University of King's College in hopes of going to rabbinics in the future. I've been a part of Oraynu since I was about 12 years old, participating in Oraynu's children's school and later in the Jews youth program and the board of the Society for Humanistic Judaism as a youth representative, and I am so excited and eager to be participating in this panel discussion today. So COVID-19 has impacted Judaism through the way people have gotten involved in humanistic Judaism. Programs have changed to adapt to difficult times, which we have seen everywhere, and people have had the chance to question their faith and take more of an individualistic and humanistic approach. People didn't realize that they didn't need mass religious events to keep their faith, and they were able to turn inwards to their own ideas, and a lot of people of multiple faiths used that opportunity and time to question the values that were actually important to their own ideals of religious beliefs. Many people have sought out more enlightened and new approaches to old positions and statements on traditional religions, such as humanism. The programs I have aligned myself with personally have moved much more internationally, as Rabbi Adam was saying, and moved to be much more focused on exactly what our congregation needed and valued the most, which looks different in every community. I have seen so many fantastic new initiatives and that are so loved by all, and adaptations on traditions that might become a part of the new norm if things ever go back to normal. Such as youth events becoming more frequent, different groups in our community who didn't have the chance to connect before finding new opportunities to bridge that education and valued learning. We all reach out to each other during these times, and that has made groups that value humanism over all else so much stronger in these times. Personally, humanistic Judaism has been very helpful for me coping through the pandemic. I had an amazing international and internal support system that gave me a lot of strength in some of the hardest times during COVID-19. Religiously, Judaism and traditional values have been something that I have explored a lot of during the pandemic, while I start to take note and think about how my Judaism will change and grow on my way to university and through COVID-19. And this has led me to explore what I connect with and what I don't in the Torah and in our religious beliefs. Every day, for example, every day I read a daily mitzvah and I remind myself what it is I strive for in living as a Jew, and I say it is my light and my journey in tikkun olam and tzedakah. I take what I resonate with through the traditions and through everything else, and I acknowledge the parts that I don't, and I move on from them in the best way I can. Our community also did the humanistic thing, and checking in with families and making sure that they were okay. By doing so, we brought light to community members who might not have had such a connection to our congregation if not for those vital check-ins. In-person gatherings that meant I'd be remiss to say that everything worked out amazingly through the pandemic in our congregation, as we have suffered a lot of loss from in-person gatherings that meant the world to us, to the loss of our own, which we were not fully able to commemorate and cherish the way we would have without the worry of COVID-19. Humanistic faith puts our beliefs in only the tangible, that things we can prove and what we know to be fact, and not to bother with what we can't prove. And while science is a part of that unpredictability and the horror that this pandemic is, nothing but a moral conundrum for agnosticism and epistemology. Science strengthens the belief in humanistic Judaism because, as an agnostic religion, we believe that the only things worth following and understanding are the things we can tangibly respond to and the things that we can work with and to make the world a better place. Our community does not focus on whether or not there is or isn't a God because there is no proof either way, and therefore it is not valuable or invaluable to study making the world a better place. The pandemic highlighted the chasm between those that understand science and those that refuse. Humanistic Judaism says that what we do what is right for people because it is right for people and not because God tells us to. The strength of science followers often takes away from those that are God-focused. Does it help? Yes, grows the movement, but it also possibly distances people and could create a more divide and a bigger hostile religious conundrum. Going forward, I believe that Humanistic Judaism will lean more heavily and try to center itself around social justice and tikkun olam to the very highest extent possible, as it is already doing. With everything in the world that has been going on, our communities have seen global pandemics spark crisis around the world and close to home. We have seen the value of standing together against injustices more and more than ever, and our international community has gained positively from social justice initiatives within our groups. There will always be an online element to our events and traditions now. There is no way around it. The question should not be how to avoid it, but how do we use this opportunity to be online as an advantage even more than we already could. In the future, I see our movements growing even more from being online because it forces communication and exploration on a large scale as well as individually. People are increasingly delusioned by aestheticism and materialism, that metaphors and the items we have such value can be taken for granted. And navigating this new dynamic will be an interesting challenge, but one that I think presents opportunities to grow these ideals, especially in an online community. Thank you.
Thank you, Jennie. Paul, we now go to you.
Hi, everybody. Great to be here with you all. So I have a really hard time thinking about the trends. As Adam said, we're learning to live with it, but it still very much feels like we're still in it, and it feels early to be talking about, well, what do we know has changed for sure? And I do want to say that we're talking about abstractions when there may be some folks here with us tonight who were personally profoundly, terribly impacted by COVID, by losing a family member. And I feel very lucky that my immediate family hasn't had a loss from COVID. But for folks who have, there's no conversation about what's the trend here. It's devastating, and millions of Americans have suffered from it. So I don't know what the long-term repercussion is that this is a global traumatic event, and it happens once every 100 years. And how does it affect societies, and how does it affect individuals? For my family, I have a 9-year-old boy and a 6-year-old girl, and they are more comfortable in masks than not. I have to remind my son when we're walking outdoors that he can lower his mask, and he's more comfortable with it on. And I don't know how long that's going to last. They're talking now in New York City about removing the mask mandate. So, the long-term impact, I have no idea about. And I think that this kind of speaks to the topics that we're talking about today as it relates to humanistic Judaism. It's hard to tell, but in general, I feel like events like this don't cause time to take a complete 180. They tend to accelerate trends that we can already identify. I was already working remotely years before COVID, because when they hired me at Society for Humanistic Judaism, they provided a lovely office with a beautiful desk and a nice green scenery, which we don't get a lot of in Brooklyn, out in Farmington Hills, Michigan. But I said, I'm not leaving Brooklyn. And they said, okay, that's all right. We're a national organization, should work out. And I learned how to use the computer, as Adam said. And I do think a lot of people had been in conversation about work-life balance long before COVID, and the pandemic accelerated those kind of conversations. And likewise with humanistic Judaism, I think that a lot of the challenges and opportunities have been accelerated or emphasized by what we're experiencing in pandemic. And I always want to kind of step back and look at the big picture, which is, what's the point? What are we trying to do with this thing, humanistic Judaism? And for me, anyway, it is to provide meaning through a philosophy and ideas and the sharing of ideas. And as Adam said, community, or I might also phrase it as organizing people to share that meaning or to act on that meaning, to provide comfort for somebody who has lost somebody, and to do that in community. And even before COVID, we at SHJ were trying to figure out what is the organizing model to do that organizing? Who does the organizing? How does it get done? And the reason why we were in that conversation is because the models that we all inherited, because they predate everyone on this webinar, was a congregational model that still works in a lot of places, is still successful in a lot of places, but is also very challenged in a lot of other places. And we were thinking about it. And now COVID, as Adam had talked about, the adaptations that his congregation has been thinking about, you know, when do we do hybrid? When might we want to drop hybrid? Those are all important considerations to this larger question of how do we organize people and to do what, you know, for what purpose? And that piece of it, I think, is still very much relevant in people's lives, to celebrate holidays and life cycle events, to mourn together as a community when people suffer losses, and to be there for one another. I don't think anyone objects to those ideas. And yet it's harder and harder, it seems, to mobilize people to do those things. So who is succeeding at that? You know, who can organize? What kind of organizers do we have? And traditionally in the congregational model, it is a rabbi. In many of our communities, we don't have rabbis, but we have lay leaders, many of whom have been trained to a certain degree, and others who do it intuitively. But what they're doing is organizing people around purpose, and they're doing it because they're on a mission. Nobody I know, and I've met a lot of rabbis, gets into it for the money. They're on a mission, and they're fired by the service that they provide, but they're only successful if the people that they're organizing also get on that mission and share that mission and take on pieces of that mission with them. So during the pandemic, I feel like we've seen that happen, but again, it was happening, but maybe we became more aware of it because we've become connected to people in different ways, and the people who are most motivated to do certain things have stepped up or become more visible to those of us who may not be in their geographic area. So for example, on Facebook, if you're on Facebook, and I'm not saying you should be on it if you're not, if you've avoided it this far, but if you are on it and you're not yet on the Humanistic Judaism discussion group, it's been very interesting to see who the regular contributors are internationally, and they're on a mission, some of them, to create meaning for themselves and share it with others that is not at all guided by anyone in the organized Humanistic Judaism movement, but they're fired up by the idea, by the mission. So to me, during pandemic, post-pandemic, whatever comes next, I want to hang on to these ideas of purpose and meaning, and then organizing around that. And how do we do that? And it may be that we're just tweaking the old models. It may be that we are reinventing new models. I don't think that this is a new challenge because of pandemic, but I do think that the pandemic has both opened our eyes or accelerated that challenge, and at the same time, potentially provided some of the tools to answer some of those challenges. Thanks.
Thank you, Paul. Denise, the ball is yours.
Hi, everybody. It's nice to see so many familiar names. I can't see your faces, but I can see in the participant list lots of folks that I haven't been in touch with lately. So welcome. So nice to see you. And thank you so much to Rabbi Jonathan for asking me to be here, and to all of the awesome panelists. I knew I was going to be last, and so I tried to come up with things that wouldn't have already been said. So, and we didn't share our remarks beforehand. So I might be going in a direction that seems a bit left field, but bear with me because I think ideally it's all going to be relevant to the conversation. So I think that one of the opportunities in the post-COVID, or whatever we were going to decide it is, maybe never post, but learning to live with COVID world, is that some of the things we have previously thought to be either or a versus sort of scenario, we're learning that it can be both and. And so if there's an overall theme to what I'm going to talk about, it's some of that both and-ness. Certainly, I agree with everything everybody has said. One of the really wonderful things about humanistic Judaism, I believe, is that people are very pro-science. So, I mean, perhaps it's a conversation in some of our communities where people are not wanting to be vaccinated or haven't wanted to wear masks. But my sense is that that's a challenge that is less in our communities than many other communities, because we do have such a pro-science orientation. And so that to me is wonderful. And although the Judaism I've been doing is online, I would never worry that there are a significant number of people who align themselves with sort of the anti-vaxxer movement, which also has a lot of connections with anti-Semitism, which I think is a huge problem for many Jewish communities, and not so much ours, which is really lovely. Nevertheless, we all have challenges that we will need to deal with. One of the things I started thinking about literally just before the pandemic, the last thing I did before things shut down in 2020 was I attended a gathering for Jewish professionals working in sort of non-traditional environments called Knisa. I met up with Paul in New York, and it's sort of hard to believe that we did that in March of 2020, when a week later they were putting up a field hospital in Central Park. But one of the speakers who spoke at that gathering has really influenced my thinking since. His name is Casper ter Kuile. He works for the Sacred Design Lab, and he co-published an article called How We Gather. Some of you have maybe heard me speak about it before, but at that gathering, he spoke about loneliness. And this was just before lockdowns, where some people were so isolated for such a long time. So even before that, we were aware of what gets called the loneliness epidemic. It impacts people who are elderly. It also impacts lots of other people. And we live in a very strange world where you would think being connected online would make people so much less lonely, but sometimes these digital technologies actually exacerbate the experience of loneliness for people. And we know that sometimes people scroll their social media feeds or attend online events, and they end up feeling even more alone than perhaps if they had done something else. And so I've been thinking a lot about loneliness versus togetherness, and how, again, rather than thinking about them as separate, we can think about them as coming together. That one of the things the pandemic has taught us is that we can be on our own, and sometimes some of us have enjoyed more time on our own than previously we might have experienced. But how do we play with notions of loneliness and togetherness? And in Casper ter Kuile's book that came out during the pandemic, The Power of Ritual, he talks about the loneliness epidemic in terms of a paradox, which I think is very useful for our communities to think about. He says that we are, all of us, all the time, ultimately alone. And I think that's really true for those of us who subscribe to a humanistic philosophy, that we have to be self-reliant. There's no one coming to save us. And at the exact same time, we are, all of us, all the time, connected, which is also so true. And the pandemic has certainly taught us that, because my behavior can impact the health and even the life or death of somebody in my community who I've never met. And we've never, I think, felt that connectedness here in North America perhaps as much as we did during the pandemic. Casper talks about, it's funny that Adam shared 3 C's. He has 3 B's, which I was going to talk about, which are belonging, becoming, and beyond. And I think that in my work in Jewish community, and also my work elsewhere in teaching and building communities in different kinds of contexts, I've been thinking about this concept as we move into a kind of post or living with COVID time. The idea of belonging first, that we can't meaningfully ask people to engage with social justice or to engage with the process where they reach to become a better self or a higher self. We can't build community really unless people experience a sense of belonging. And I think whether we're doing programming in person or online or both, fostering that sense of belonging is even more crucial now than perhaps it has ever been. once people feel a sense of belonging and they recognize that they can be affirmed and seen even when we make mistakes and even when we're not perfect, then we can reach for a sense of becoming our best selves, building better communities. And then Casper ter Kuile talks about a sense of beyond, which he's very careful to say could be something supernatural, but doesn't have to be. So for me, beyond refers to our interconnectedness, our delicate balance, where we need to be good stewards of the earth, where perhaps we've failed, and just a sense of our interdependence more broadly, as I referred to before. So I think some of the opportunities might be refiguring, thinking through the belonging, becoming, and beyond for our communities and how we actualize them. Another thing that I've been thinking about is embodiment. One of the awesome things about humanistic Judaism is that it's very intellectual, and for those of us who like having conversations with lots of depth and philosophy, that can be really wonderful and inspiring. And I think at the same time, sometimes we have discounted the body, the emotional side of life, and we don't need to think of those things as being in contradiction. I'm learning much more about embodiment and even how social justice ideals need to be embodied. So I'm thinking about how our communities can ask people to actually engage with the body, think about community in terms of embodied experiences of togetherness and what that might mean. Connected to that is a sense of care. Right now, a lot of my academic research is on something that scholars call conspirituality, where the world of the spiritual and the world of conspiracy theory come together. And I'm sure you're aware that there's lots of that going on. Those of us in Canada recently witnessed the trucker convoy, and there's lots of conspiracy theory that's propelling some of the attitudes that were present there. And it gets wrapped up in this idea that as long as you meditate or you eat the right foods and you live clean and all these kinds of ways, then you don't have to worry about things like a global pandemic. It's so selfish, and it's so anti-science and anti-rational. What I think we need to understand is that there really is no self-care that can get us out of things like a pandemic. That even people like me, who are extremely privileged and fortunate to be healthy, and the truth is, COVID was never a huge threat to me and my family. Sometimes things happen, I understand that, but chances are, if there had never been masks and there had never been vaccines, I would have been okay. But I don't want to live in a world where I only worry about myself and my family. I want to live in a world where we take good care of each other. And so I think one of the opportunities of the pandemic is to get us to think much more broadly about how there is no self-care without community care, that we absolutely need to think about how we take care of each other, and that actually our own individual wellness depends on community well-being. That as we see the horrific events in the world right now, I don't think any of us are really okay. And so we have to really move to an understanding that when we take care of each other, we're actually doing something good for ourselves as well. Many people have already talked about the kind of either or of in-person or online, congregational model or other kinds of models. And I think all of that is also, yes, both, and all of it. We need all of it. When I started my online community, I was with Oraynu and delighted to do in-person programming. And I was also a newish mom, and I was aware that when you're, nursing a child who won't take a bottle, it's very hard to make it out to in-person programs. And I wanted there to be online options. And we're aware there are people with disabilities or other kind of accessibility challenges who simply are not going to be coming to in-person programs. They never were. And we're learning how to meet those people literally where they are, which is their homes, and figure out how to serve them, even as we crave in-person connection. And we need all of it. I really believe that. So I'll close out just by saying that I've been thinking about well-being as the overall category, and how Humanistic Judaism can foster a sense of well-being, both for ourselves and our broader communities. And that's going to be my focus moving forward. And I'm so delighted to be in conversation with all of you as we work towards that. Thank you.
Thank you, Denise. I want to take some time to see if people on the panel have questions for one another. I will start with one, and this is really a question for everyone. Do you personally feel in your own life, let's say, and your family life, that your being a humanistic Jew has helped you cope with the pandemic? And if so, what about being a humanistic Jew do you feel has helped you cope with the pandemic? Jennie.
Thank you for your question. I think that being a humanistic Jew myself has been really helpful for me during the pandemic. It has broadened my sense of faith, and I know we think a lot about faith as like our faith in God. However, I believe it is like that faith in our spirituality that we see in ourselves, and that we see our connections, and we see that there's hope because we are all connected together. And I feel like that has really helped me. I think the values of humanistic Judaism, especially Tikkun Olam and tzedakah, have been so important for me moving forward, especially during COVID, protests that we were seeing, activism that was coming to light. Having those values ingrained in me has been so important to fight back and find new ways to fight in our communities against injustices we see have been so important. And just like having a community that you can fall back on when you fail has been so important, like the Oraynu congregation has been for me, and SHJ in its entirety.
Jennie, thank you. Anyone else on the panel like to speak to that question? Adam?
Sure. Well, certainly having a community to rely on is very important. And it was important for us to not feel alone. You know, it's not the same seeing people in person. It's not the same doing a fist bump or a toe tap. I was so excited to get back to shaking hands that one summer where we were open and I could actually shake someone's hand. I never missed it so much. It was just the right balance because I'm not a hugger, but I like that personal contact, and I surprisingly missed it more than I expected. So having a community where I felt confident that people were being safe and taking precautions and so on, and that enabled us to do some outdoor events, and we even opened up to the in-person programming in the fall for our high holidays. So I actually had live people to talk to instead of just a camera and a circle light beaming me in the face. It's a lot easier to be engaging and engaged when you're not talking to a screen. So I think that was important for me to have that community of people to be connected to. I don't know that some of the approach to science was more so or less so than other people. There are plenty of Reform Jews who are very attached to science also, even Orthodox and conservative Jews who do so as well. And there are times when our attachment to science is also partisan. I know people who are attached to science for vaccines, but who don't eat GMOs when science says they're just as not dangerous as vaccines. But we don't, that's not on our side. So we have the challenge. And some of the anti-vaccination stuff was people from the left who suspect big pharma. And I don't trust big pharma that much either. But, this was that balancing act. So if anything, I think what Humanistic Judaism helped me with was epistemologically to have some humility and to say there are things I know and there are things I don't know. I'm going to see what the experts have to say, but sometimes they're going to tell me things I don't like or that I don't want to hear. And I have, if I believe the science, if that's a core of my faith or whatever I term to call it, that's important too. And the last point somebody pointed out in the chat, I did talk a little bit about coping, with this idea of the life of courage and dealing with the uncertainty. That's part of our philosophy too. If part of what made it so hard for everybody was not knowing what's safe and what's not safe and what's going to happen next week, and are the numbers going up and are the numbers going down. That I couldn't, we learned how to not schedule things. I'm a scheduler. We couldn't schedule anything more than 2 weeks ahead of time. And that was maddening for me, but it was a lesson for me too, in learning how to be more flexible, but also reaffirming our value that we can live with uncertainty. I don't know. This is another Sherwin quote. I don't know is a brave and dignified answer, especially when it's true. And it's true a lot of the time. So we had to learn to live or relearn how to live even more in that I don't know and the uncertainty, but still act and still do things. 99% is still pretty good. And so that's what we have to live in now is we are the 99%, but also we are acting on the 99% going forward.
Thank you, Adam. Paul.
When this started, I'm like, okay, a science event. This is going to make people more science minded. And when and the plague wasn't picking sides, right? It showed, there's no benefit to believing one way over another. This is all about humans, and maybe we can find some commonality about it. And then, of course, science saved us for the most part. I mean, we got a vaccine, and the head of Pfizer's Jewish, and all of this, like, aha, we're winning. But then there are these stories that, polls of have the pandemic strengthened or weakened your faith. And lo and behold, the faithful had their faith strengthened by the pandemic. And the reality is that I do take strength in humanistic Judaism. I've always been a humanistic Jew. I didn't know that I was until I learned the phrase, like, well into adulthood. I wish I had known it. That's part of what fires me and my work, is that I wish I had known when I was younger that I was a humanistic Jew. So I don't know what it's like to feel otherwise, but I'm jealous, frankly, of someone who genuinely believes that it's all going to be okay. That they get to, go to heaven afterwards. Like, I wish I could believe it, and I don't really necessarily want to pop their bubble about it, as long as they're not completely messing up the world, which, a lot of them are. But for the ones who are, for it's just their own personal meaning, I'm jealous of that, because what a lovely way to find comfort. And I wish I could do that for myself. And I think that as a movement, this may be a conversation that we could have, moving forward, because I do think that, frankly, there's strength and there's courage, and hope. Those are the words that Show and Wine, I really admire. But there's also just sadness and depression that this is it, and it's an unfairly short life. And so I'm happy to talk about those things, because I feel jealous of the folks who will say it's all fine, no matter what. Like, God never throws, what's the expression? Never throws more at you than you can handle, right? Unless you die, but then you go to heaven. Like, there's always a thing that comes after that's still good, right? Unless you go to hell. Which, anyway. I wish I've never believed that. So I don't know what it would be like and whether it is genuine comfort or not. But, so I vacillate wildly from almost like a smugness of, like, see, science, all the way to the other end of, wow, I wish I had that kind of comfort in my life.
Thank you. Thank you, Paul. Denise, did you want to respond, or?
Yeah, I think I'm going to just take a different approach to answering your question, which is that it was some of the Jewish ritual that I found really comforting when times got hard. One of the things I think many of us experienced during the various lockdowns is a sense that all the days bled together. It was very hard to, many of us, if we weren't used to working from home, found our work life and our home life bled into each other. What was a weekend anymore? But one thing that my family does every week is have Shabbat dinner. And so there was this clear, demarcation of an end of a week. And our tradition in our home is to go around and say our favorite memory from the past week. And we kept that going. And sometimes it was hard to think of a favorite memory from some of those really hard weeks. But I think that was really good for us. And it was certainly good for me. This year we're in a Shemitah year, a sabbatical year. And so I've been really trying to lean into that Jewish wisdom and think about inviting more of a sense of rest, working less, taking more breaks. And so I think that as humanistic Jews, we don't accept all of the religious practices and traditions, but the ones that do work for us, I think can absolutely be a balm during hard times. And that has been the case for me.
Thank you, Denise. If I were to answer my own question, I would have said very much what you did. that often during the pandemic, just one day bled into another. I was at home all the time, and just having the ritual of Shabbat was going to be somewhat different. We had a Friday night dinner. It was a special time. It was a different time. It marked something, and that was really helpful, I know, for me. One other, I'll ask just one more question and then see if you all have any questions, and then we'd love to have questions if there are people or comments that we can relay even from the people out there in the webinar. My other question goes to some extent to a number of you alluded to this in different ways. Jennie, you talked about how people had more time alone to really kind of look at their own beliefs because of the pandemic, and a number of you talked about this, I don't want to say a once-in-a-lifetime event, but a major event, not just for an individual, but for our world to go through. Sometimes, sometimes someone will go through a really difficult time, an accident takes place, their life changes overnight, and who they are and what they think about the world, that has to get re-examined, for some, or it could be a really wonderful event sometimes that happens, overnight, but often it's a difficult one. So when major transitions take place, it is a time of stock taking for people. And the alone time, I think that for many of us that has come with the pandemic also in its own way, produces a kind of stock taking. Do you think that will change at all what humanistic Judaism is to people, what it means, what we think is most important about the messages we deliver? I don't know the answer to that, but maybe it's that, oh wow, community is really, really important. Or maybe it's that being able to be alone and accept, as sort of the tension Denise talked about, that's really, really important. But I put that question out, or maybe think, this is just a blip. Okay, our message is just going to go on the way it always had gone on. Any thoughts about that?
It's hard to focus on only one cause of what's happening in our world. We had a lot of things happening over the last few years, not just one. And we had these protests for social justice happening at the same time in new ways. Obviously, they go back even 10 years to the Trayvon Martin case, which just had its 10th anniversary this past month. But it accelerated, certainly, in the last 2 years. We had the tremendous upheavals in American politics of 2 impeachments and the post-election issues, and obviously January 6th, 2021, and the riot at the Capitol. I mean, were these exacerbated by a pandemic? Probably. Is it easy to tell whether the changes we make are going to be as a result of that? I don't know. I don't know that I would have been talking as much about politics in my congregational life as I have in the last 2 years without both the racial justice protests and the pandemic. I think in some ways they inspired us to think differently about our role in the world, about our responsibilities to our neighbors, and our place in the racial hierarchy of the North American culture that has affected us without us even knowing it. Some of those internalized issues that we are becoming more aware of, even within the Jewish community. The Me Too movement has been happening at the same time, in a little bit longer window. So there's all these changes happening, and I think we are in for a period of rapid change. It won't only be because of the pandemic. The pandemic may have sped it up a bit, but I think there's all these other factors that are playing into this. It's hard to tease out that this is only pandemic related. I think it's all of it together.
Okay, thank you, Adam. I appreciate that. I'm now starting to move to questions and comments from the chat. So if people out there have them, please share them along. I'll begin with one from Rabbi Eva Goldfinger. For those of you who don't know, everyone on the panel knows Eva, but she too has been a rabbi at Oraynu and instrumental in building this congregation over the years. So Eva writes the following. I'd love to hear from the panelists their thoughts on how the future of our movement and congregations what we need to reevaluate in terms of the financial aspects. If we can spend, whoops, somebody else just wrote in, sorry. If we can spend less money on renting locations for all our programming, can extra money be used for more or better programs, used for funding charitable donations, used for paying staff and rabbis better as cost of living goes up? Toronto's not a cheap city. Any thoughts on the financial impact of this? I'll say either at the congregational level or at the movement level. Paul, maybe Paul could speak to the latter, but I'll put all those questions out. Thank you, Eva.
I can talk quickly because I'm not the most knowledgeable on that. I think the most important thing would be economic sustainability will become so much more different in our movements and in our congregations because people know what exactly they want and what they need and what we can do without now. And I think people are now searching for exactly what they need and they have the agency to do that. And it's going to cause like a lot of questioning of that economic sustainability and what we need and where we can like relocate things.
Yeah, it's something we were thinking about again since I came on. It's what I worked on with other communities across denominations before I came on to SHJ, and it has become an accelerated, more urgent need since the pandemic. The congregational financial model still works in places, and it works because the cost and the value are in alignment. In other words, people understand why it pays to pay the rabbi, why it costs to get your children a quality Jewish education if that's something that you want. But it's harder to justify high expenses for like high holiday tickets when that model had been shattered years ago by other operations who said this notion of pay to pray. In our movement, it's what, pay to think, maybe? I don't know. We're not praying, but that the model had been challenged, and I think rightly so. So the value is not a cost proposition. So first of all, there's two things going on with money. One is that someone might genuinely not be able to afford it, in which case we as a community need to make accommodations. So nobody should be unable to participate because they can't afford it. And this literally just came up very recently. Someone said, they complained about the cost. And we said, well, that shouldn't be a barrier and we'll get right on it. And they're like, oh, no, I could pay it. I just don't want to, rather take the kids on a cruise, and so they went with the low cost, ultra Orthodox alternative, even though they align philosophically with us. And that's one person's decision, but that's our competition, so to speak. And it's part of the thinking that we need to do. So there's a value proposition, there is our philosophy, and then there is just the thing, what is it we're providing? If it's just a Shabbat get together, why do you have to pay anybody? Why can't you get a group of 10 or 12 people together and that's what you do? So we need to make the case. And so that's a piece of what we've been working on. But there are also other models, and the other models and it's not either or, it's incorporating additional pieces. And so I'll just stop with the one thing. There are multiple avenues, and I think we're trying to work along several of them. So I'll mention two of them. One is we just got a grant from a very generous donor at SHJ who wanted to fund a very specific program. And I convinced them that the money would be so much more powerful if we actually brought on a grant writer who could try to fund that program and also try to fund additional programs. So that's one model that people are using, is a third-party funder, somebody, and I know Oraynu does pieces of all of these things as well, but the membership-only model is what's under challenge, so we can find third-party funders who want to support it because they understand what the value is and they want to share it with others. And there are, so that's one model that we can think about. And the other is a positioning without even necessarily doing anything different, but positioning our movement as a cause. This is not just fee for service. It's not just you come in and pay us and then we'll provide you with X, Y, and Z. Because people sit down and they do the math and they're like, wow, that's a lot for this, this, and this, and I'm not going to go to that. That's not what we're doing. We're a cause. We're on a mission, and we're trying to provide this mission to other people. So if you believe in this mission, support us as a cause and allow us to go do this for folks who don't yet know that we're out there. So those are a number of the avenues we've already been working on, but COVID makes it much more clear that this has got to happen soon.
Thank you, Paul. Several people in the comments wrote, I won't read through the entire comments, but I'll say the need for sensitivity in different ways for those people who may have financial challenges or technology challenges, particularly in this era. So Walter Hellman, for example, writes, at Kol Shalom, we've used lowering costs to lower our dues with the hope that it'll make it easier for people to join. David Korn of Baltimore Jewish Cultural Havara talks about Zoom is great when it works, but there may be technical issues you have to deal with sometimes, and it may be a problem for older people, for example, using computers, or people with disabilities. So there are certainly challenges related to that medium. Matthew, I apologize if I won't say your name right. Brockamel writes a question, and I'll just try to kind of paraphrase it because it's kind of a long question. But he asks, in some ways, could there be almost a movement-wide, I'll call it Host Shabbat, or he says, I once thought there were no Jewish communities in Texas, that all Jews lived in New York City or LA and still watch Central Synagogue's Shabbat live stream. So Central Synagogue, for those who don't know, is a leading Reform congregation in New York that has a brilliant Shabbat service that they stream, and I don't know how many viewers they get. But if you think of mega church as opposed to your community parish, that's the model that's being put forward there. And it's one that really works because of the nature of online community and all that. Could you see something in that direction in some ways? I know, Adam, you talked in the beginning about how much more was now online or available that way than ever had been before. But could you see some, I'll say, some really sleek Humanistic Jewish, program, and maybe Denise, you function in that world much more than many of us do. Do you have any thoughts about that? Yeah.
I was actually going to push back on something Denise said, which I do with all love and respect, where she said that it has to be everything and both and all of everything. And I'm sorry, there are limited amounts of time and limited amounts of focus. And sometimes when you're doing an online program designed for an online program, it's going to be different and better than a camera in the back of the room. Now, one of the reasons that Central Synagogue's production works is they have a tech team with multiple cameras and a producer who's telling them which camera. I mean, it's like they're running NBC Nightly News or a sitcom or something, and they're doing this professionally produced. And I love the idea of having the SHJ promote local communities' Shabbat videos, but there's two challenges we have to think about. One is this to be a live interactive thing, or is this to be a watch a video thing? And then time zone makes a difference, because not everybody lives in the Eastern time zone. I even had to remind people organizing this program that not everybody lives in the Eastern time zone, and that we need to put the time zone on the promotional material for it. So is it going to be live, or is it, and then what's the quality control? Because our camera in the back of the room might be fine if it's just a local congregation that's trying to be nice by putting, but if this is the national, put our stamp on it, everybody should watch this, then it may not be the same in every community, where a place like my congregation that has a regular location with a very high quality video camera that we share with the Unitarian Church that we share space with, or the Birmingham Temple in Michigan that has a permanent space of its own that they can really wire up in a fancy way, versus a Kol Shalom in Portland, or another congregation that's renting temporary space. It's a smaller community, and they would come out with something that would be less polished, still very meaningful. Or maybe we decide that quality control is less important. But I think that there are questions of priority. And if I had to choose between spending my congregation's resources of people and money on a better produced video or on a more meaningful experience for the people in the room, and I'm choosing my time of what I'm going to emphasize, I'm going to emphasize the people in the room, because they're the ones who come. And to be honest, they're the ones who are more likely to join and pay dues. Some people online are very generous and they're willing to contribute to something remote, and that's great. But also people experiencing things remote, it's like watching YouTube, and they might do that, and they might do something else, and they might go somewhere else. And maybe they like the not having a label on it, not having a membership card, and not having the obligations and the fundraising appeals that come to them. I mean, we had someone on the SHA discussion group, the HA discussion list just recently, saying, boy, wouldn't it be great if the SHA put out their mezuzah insert text for free to everybody when they provide it to members. And I said, joining as an online member is $45 a year. That's like it's like $3 or $4 a month. And I understand some people can't even afford that. I appreciate that, but many people can, and the question becomes priorities. So this is where I push back a little bit. I don't think we can do everything all. We have to choose priorities, and my priority are the people in the room. If others can participate in some way that doesn't overwhelm that responsibility and that target, then great. I'm happy to work to facilitate that. But I don't want to spend so much time on production that it takes away from the lived experience.
I feel like I have to say something because if Adam says that he's going to challenge me, I have to respond. And maybe it'll be disappointing to learn that I don't think we disagree. I did not mean to suggest that any one of our communities should be doing all the things all the time. I actually think that we require an ecosystem. I completely agree that it's not feasible to have people doing meaningful work in person and online at the same time. I have learned that where they've taken a hybrid approach can appreciate what I'm saying. No, I think we do need some online programming that's designed to be online, and we need some in-person programming that's designed to be in person. And I think that's where some of the ideas coming out in this discussion via the chat are exciting. When Adam and I did the Purim program last year together, it's great, and we weren't doing that much collaborative programming beforehand. So I think that thinking about how we serve different communities in different ways, different constituent groups in different ways, is the opportunity in the post-COVID landscape. But I didn't mean to suggest we should all do it all at the same time. And I also want to address the question of money. Many people, including this program, many people put their programs out on YouTube or on social media for free, and I don't. I think that I do think we need people to invest in professional Jewish curated space, and I think we should be careful how much we give.
Can I take that in a different direction? And I think that's all fascinating, but the mention of Central Synagogue made me think about this aspect of, what is our unique selling position as a movement? What makes us special? And we could pour tons of money, if we had it, to emulate what they do there. And it's beautiful music. And they are, by the way, they're a synagogue that there's a wait list to be a member of that synagogue. Which is unheard of everywhere else. It's a remarkable community. And you can do that in Manhattan, and you can't, but anyway, even if we did that, what would the difference be then? The words are slightly different in the songs that our beautiful cantor's voice sings. That's not the mission that fires me, to recreate that or something like that and be amazing and be polished and be beautiful, versus I want to talk about the stuff I'm talking about. And again, I'm at the umbrella organization. I'm not at a congregation, so I don't have to hear from folks who say to me, you know what, I actually do believe life continues after death, and I don't appreciate you saying that humanistic Jews don't believe that. And not all humanistic Jews have to believe as I do. But I want to talk. I want to have the conversation. I want to talk about the terror I fear, or the sadness, or the loss. And I know, as Adam said, Reform Jews feel this too, but they don't get to talk about it in the context that we do, which is an acknowledgement that we don't believe in the biblical God. We can openly say that. That to me is our unique selling proposition, and I want to be in community with other people who feel that way, or at least are married to people who feel that way, and support them in their exploration of it, right? Or understand that we're coming together as a community because we want to struggle with this together, with what this means for us, for humanity, how we move forward as a people, as Jews, as humans, all of that. To me, that's the thing. And I think the rabbis on this webinar do it amazingly. And that's what I want to bottle and sell. And I'm not really interested, because we're never going to be as good. And likewise, people talk about social justice, which we've only touched on a tiny bit. And we are doing social justice. We have an initiative, Jews for Secular Democracy. We try to create a very specific niche for it, in part because we're never going to be Jews for Justice or Bend the Arc. Like that, those are amazing organizations. You should get involved with them too. We have a specific thing that we can say and that we can do. And I'm always finding, when I want to kind of drift to something else, try to get that focus back to what's the unique thing that we get to say that nobody else is saying.
I thank you, Paul. This builds on this question of community, or the nature of community. And Risa M., who I take it may be related to Jennie, writes a question in we have a sort of there's a chat feature going on here, and she poses a question that I think is a wonderful question, and Rabbi Denise offered an answer. I want to ask you what you think of this subject, because I think it's a really wonderful one, thinking about this. Risa writes, "We have always lived by the importance of community, hence a minyan." So, for those who don't know, a minyan is a kind of the quorum of 10, traditionally men, but in more liberal branches of Judaism, 10 people that were required for certain prayers. We've always lived by the importance of community. Can you feel that same sense of community online, or do we perpetuate loneliness by staying online? And Rabbi Denise responded, "We would likely answer this differently, but I think there's huge potential for meaningful community online, recognizing it's not for everyone." So this is very much both and, if I get it. "But it doesn't happen by event only. There has to be thoughtful community curation." I want to ask our other panelists, and I'm really very curious about Jennie, your thoughts about this, because I know my kids, for example, have so much community experience online in a way that I never did growing up. I mean, they chat, they're in groups and so on. So what does meaningful, or Denise, maybe you want to say, what does meaningful online community look like to you? Because I know, Adam, you said it was so important, the community of people you're with. It's certainly one of our deep humanistic values, Jewish values, being in community. And what is the nature of being in community online? So that's...
Yeah, I think that's like an amazing thing to talk about. I think I think Denise worded it perfectly, that there is such a difference between the in-person connection that you make and the online. Neither is invaluable. They're just so different. And I think personally, I value my connections with people online just as much. I think connections with people online, the way we're talking about it now, especially in the idea of a minyan, is that emotional readiness and that connection to people, that you're emotionally ready to take on whatever it is. And I think that is so important, and it's something that our congregations really strive for. I know in the context of the youth organization Huge Jews, Paul and I were discussing this recently, that we can have all the events we want, like, and people will come and have a great time, whatever. But what we're missing now is that connection, that after the event, let's go back and let's discuss this. And, this person said this. Do you agree? No? What about it? And that's what we're like really struggling for. Like that, oh, those like brain tingle moments afterwards where it's like, oh, let's talk about this more. Let's do this. And that's where we really have an opportunity to create more meaningful spaces after our events, after everything. Like, honestly, group chats, like social media presence, things that like we don't always consider are so important to building that connection that is so special. I know like the Huge Jews, like stuff that we've done in the past has been so helpful for maintaining like these younger members of our congregation and making them feel like that we are connected with like amazing like whole groups of people. I'm a part of another Jewish organization as well that has connected me with people like worldwide who like I go visit now, that like you would never think of having this emotional ready connection with them without the help of this like online agent. And it's so special, but it's different, and it's something that it's really different to navigate.
One of the changes that people who are native to the digital world talk about is the breaking down of the difference between the online world and IRL, or in real life. Because online experience is real life. There are real people there. And yes, you don't have the chit chat on the side. I mean, you can direct message people in a regular Zoom meeting, so you can be snarky about whoever you want, and nobody will know. Although I will warn you, if it's being recorded, they will know because it saves the chat too. So just be careful. But the point is that the experience of online life is really connecting with people, but it is different. It's not the same. It's not going to replace that personal contact of the handshake, for example. And I said to our congregation when we first made the pivot to online programming that the socialization we get from a Zoom meeting might be 60%, 70% of what we would get from an in-person gathering and conversation. But we can't go down to 0%. So we need to do as much of the 60 to 70% as we can to try to fill that hole until we can get back to the 100% of being there in person. And by the way, for people with sensory issues or people with crowd issues or germ issues, and concerns about that, being in person was worse than being online like this. So they actually appreciated this. It's just like all those people with disabilities who all of a sudden were told, oh yeah, I guess you can do your work remotely and you don't have to deal with the challenges to come in. So this is where I do agree with Denise that we should never cut this off. This is a Rubicon, a don't go back moment where we have to go forward and continue to provide this as an opportunity for people. We just have to balance the priorities there. And I appreciate the challenges people have with Zoom. I don't love it. It's got its difficulties. I sometimes joke it isn't a Zoom meeting until somebody talks while they're on mute or somebody unmutes at the wrong time, right? So we still have these challenges, and there were signal issues tonight with people getting a little choppy and so on. It's not perfect, but it's not zero either. And so in a world of imperfection and incompletion, we have to do our best to meet those human needs. And if Zoom and online programming helps do that, then we should also do that.
We're almost at the end of our time. And let me just ask, there are a few more questions in the chat, and we're not going to have time to get to them all. But let me just ask each panelist a closing thought. Anyone wish to share a closing thought from the discussion?
I will say one of my best experiences of the pandemic is a man from Romania who gets up at 3 o'clock in the morning, his time, and signs on to our adult education class that runs at 7:30 p.m. Central Time for my congregation. I never would have heard of this person before in my life, I don't know why he doesn't watch the videos that we post within a few days afterwards at a more convenient time for him. But I think there's something about it for him to know that he's on when we are on, that if he had a question, he could type it in the chat, or he could, show us his pajamas and ask the question. But he feels a connection through that. And that never would have happened without the transition for the pandemic. So I would never have wished for a pandemic to cause this to happen. But it has caused our members and people around the world to invest in the knowledge of this technology such that it does open up those kind of possibilities that were theoretically possible before, but now are really possible. So that even people who are afraid of their iPad somehow manage to work a Zoom most of the time. And that opens up doors for them to participate when they don't drive at night, or if there's weather, or if the time zone doesn't work for them, they could do a service in some other time zone. I mean, all these possibilities are there. We have to walk through the door that's been opened.
Denise?
Yeah, I mean, I would say also would not have wanted a pandemic, 0 stars out of 10. But if there are positive takeaways, one of them is that our movement has always been really centered around how we build lives of purpose and meaning. And I think that having been through a global pandemic, many people are thinking about their lives and whether we've worked too much and how we want to foster real community connections and show up for the people in our lives in ways that perhaps we were too distracted from before. And so I think that in our communities there, as we work towards building lives of purpose and meaning, we have what to draw from now.
Thank you. Jennie?
Yeah, I think adding on to that, the idea of individual reflection and making that change in yourself to think, what do I really value from this and what do I not? And making that change and striving for that connection and that individuality in your own practices makes what we've gone through so much more special, that we have that individual approach to things now, that this is what my humanism looks like, this is what my Judaism looks like, and I am going to strive for that connection with people who think the same way. I talk to multiple people. One of my best friends is a Lutheran priest who lives in Scotland, and we had so many conversations about this, how you start to look at your own values and you see that in others, and you see that in ways that you don't before, because you don't have those connections that you did before, and you have to make new ones. And that's so special and so exciting.
Thank you.
I'll just say that I think that with everything, there's positives and negatives. And I find that being on Zoom with folks who I know already, particularly if we have met in person multiple times, it's a continuation, and it makes things potentially better because we can communicate even more, and we already know each other. So, I don't necessarily have to see whether you're wearing pants or not. But for folks who are just coming in, it's tough. And that's the piece where, in whatever ways we can, to do the both ands, to meet them in person, even if it's just once or twice, and then be online with them. And I believe, at the very beginning, Adam started with, we were able to have Denise become a rabbi through remote learning, but there was the in-person connections that happened that then, strengthened that over time. So the online just feels like it's continuing the in-person. And so that's how I feel like it can all work hand in hand.
Thank you, Paul. I'm reminded, part of my own training was at the Reconstructionist Rabbinical College. And as I think about these things, I think of Rabbi Mordecai Kaplan's view that Judaism was always an evolving creature. And it's an evolving civilization that changes over time. And I think this is in some ways what we're seeing now again. And so the fact that we can evolve isn't, whether it's COVID, whether it's other changes, it's not entirely new. I think that's always been a part of life, but it's maybe in some new dimensions. We're now at the closing hour, and I just want to close with a few thank yous. Again, we at Oraynu are grateful to the Davida Glazer Memorial Fund for supporting tonight's events. And we're very grateful for the panelists who've given so generously of their time, their expertise, and their insights. Special shout out to Rabbi Adam Shalom for helping us with the logistics of running a webinar this evening, and also to Oraynu's office manager, Rabbi Sadler, who we can see her sort of in the background. You can't, but she really has been in the background keeping all of this afloat. I'm grateful to Oraynu's programming committee, Sandy Horwitz, Eva Goldfinger, and Karen Levy. They have been instrumental in helping think about what this program might be. Finally, let me mention Oraynu has upcoming events, many of which are available online. Just check us out. You might expect www.oraynu.org. Shabbat programs, holiday services, cultural programs, educational programs. Whether you live in Toronto or elsewhere in Canada or even somewhere else in the world, we welcome you. And so because you can see us again, let me close tonight not by saying goodbye or good night, but lahit ra'ot, until we see you again. Shalom.